Okay, so officially, good morning. We're glad you're all here. Welcome to Tri-Valley Nonprofit Alliance's September program, Fundraising in 2022, National Trends and Local Perspectives. And a special welcome and thank you to Shaké Sulikyan, who has made this program happen and will serve as the moderator, and I think also our panel, Drew Lindsay, Marisa Melo, Aarika Riddle, and Lisa Tromovitch. Before I turn the meeting over to Shaké, I want to let you know about a few things that are happening with TVNPA. First off, for those of you who don't know, earlier this year, we opened Common Point Nonprofit Center. Common Point is a nonprofit co-working space designed to provide very affordable space for nonprofits to work alongside each other in a professional and congenial environment to hopefully create collaborations and just share information. We currently have all of our offices are currently full, but we have a couple of cubicles available, and we also have drop-in space and virtual offices. For those who aren't familiar with virtual offices, you could have a mailing address and 2 hours of conference room time. It's just $30 a month. What a deal is that, right? And so to host board meetings or short programs or meetings along those lines. We also have a nice conference room available to rent for meetings, programs, etc. So if you would like further information on that, reach out to me. I'll put my information in chat in just a little bit, and we would love to have you join us there. Later this month, we have a special program for our members, again facilitated by Shaké. It's I Am Remarkable. And I Am Remarkable is a Google initiative empowering women and underrepresented groups to speak about their accomplishments in the workplace and beyond. Size is limited, and this is a member benefit. It will take place on September 27th at Common Point Nonprofit Center. The program is free and registration will go out soon, so sign up quickly if you're interested in participating. We just completed our first executive director roundtable, it was a year session, and registration for the next cohort will be going out next week. This is also a member benefit for TVNPA members. If you're not yet a member, you can sign up on our website at tvnpa.org. But also remember, the majority of our programs are free and open to anyone interested in attending. So whether or not you're a member, please join us. We want you here. Our October 13th program is our annual Grant Makers panel, and this will take place in a hybrid format. Details on this will be coming out very soon. And then finally, please save the date for our November 16th Power of Giving program. This is a special evening program taking place at the Bankhead Theater, celebrating the power of giving in a community and the impact it has on all of our lives. Let me know if you're interested in volunteering for this event. Registration will go out later this month. We'd love it if you could join us. Oh, by the way, we also have sponsorship opportunities available, so reach out to me if you're interested in this as well. And then, as a reminder, if you haven't done so yet, I'm going to once again ask you to enter your information in chat so that we can know who is here. And Shaké mentioned, please, if you have a LinkedIn profile, enter the link there. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce Shaké. Is a nationally recognized nonprofit executive and change maker. She's dedicated her life to making the world a better place. She has over 2 decades of experience in aligning talent and resources to drive large-scale initiatives, build fruitful relationships, and reach record-breaking goals. Her nonprofit career includes roles in healthcare, academic medicine, higher education, social service, and nonprofit organizations throughout the United States. In January 2022, she joined Boyden as an executive search consultant and senior advisor. Let's see, she moved to the US at the age of 12 and currently lives in Livermore with her husband and 10-year-old son. What year did you move to Livermore, Shaké?
We moved in 2014.
2014. And that was the same year that TVNPA was started. And it wasn't shortly after Shaké arrived here, she reached out and she connected with TVNPA, and she actually was on our program committee for quite a while, and she stayed connected with us in one way or the other ever since, and we're grateful to have our passion and expertise in her area. And now it's my pleasure to turn it over to her, and Shaké will introduce the panel and take the program over.
Thank you so much, Kathy. It has been a true honor and a joy to be involved with TVNPA since I moved to Northern California. it's an amazing organization. Thrilled to see so many people here today, and please spread the word. They do incredible programming, and I'm not just saying that because I used to be involved with it, but because I truly believe in the organization and how it has helped strengthen the nonprofit sector, especially in the Tri-Valley of the San Francisco Bay Area and the East Bay. I am thrilled to be here to talk about some of our 2020 fundraising national trends, and thrilled to have our panelists joining us to also talk about local perspective. So I'll let you know that we did meet ahead of time to talk about trends and themes and questions, just to ensure that our conversation is cohesive, and we're giving you as much information as possible during the short amount of time, because these are topics that I don't know about the rest of them, but I know I can talk for days on. So we wanted to make sure that this brought value to you. And I am especially excited that Drew Lindsay is joining us today from Washington, D.C. to give us the national trends. And a lot of the ideas for this program, and as Kathy and I were discussing the September program, came out of frontline articles on the Chronicle of Philanthropy that Drew has written in the past few months about what is fundraising doing, what are nonprofits doing right now, taking into account what has happened over the last 2.5 years and the pandemic, and how we move forward, and what are some short and long-term trends. So we'll talk about those during our conversation today. With that, I wanted to do a quick introduction of our amazing panelists, and I'll go in alphabetical order. Drew Lindsay is a longtime magazine writer and editor who joined the Chronicle of Philanthropy in 2014. He previously worked at Washingtonian magazine and was a principal editor for Teacher and MHQ, which were both selected as finalists for a National Magazine Award for General Excellence. In 2005, he was one of 18 journalists selected for a year-long Knight Wallace Fellowship at the University of Michigan. And as I mentioned, he's joining us today from Washington, D.C. And their offices there. Next, we have Marisa Melo, is dedicated to serving the seniors in our community. As executive director, she manages overall strategic and operations initiatives for Meals on Wheels of Alameda County. She leads staff and fundraising activities while managing the organization's board of directors, relationships with Meals on Wheels programs, and other partners. Marisa serves on Meals on Wheels of Alameda County as leader in forging alliances with corporations, government officials, offices, and community organizations. Next, we have Aarika Riddle. She has spent her career in service to youth-focused nonprofit organizations. She is passionate about early literacy and closing the opportunity gap for students. Prior to joining Kristi Yamaguchi's Always Dream in 2020, she served as a senior executive director at Reading Partners in the San Francisco Bay Area. Born and raised in Hawaii, Aarika lives in Oakland with her husband and 2 young sons. And finally, we have our Livermore's own Lisa Tromovitch. She has dedicated her life to the arts as director and teacher. As the founding artistic director of SPARC, formerly Livermore Shakes and Livermore Shakespeare Festival, she has helped build community in the region through the production of high-quality theatrical experiences for nearly 20 years. She is also a tenured professor at Media X at University of the Pacific. In addition, her volunteer experiences include serving on the executive committee of board of directors and founding chair and selection committee for various organizations, arts organizations throughout the region and nationally. Please join me in welcoming all of our panelists. And as we get to know them, I would also like to know who is here with us today. So I'm going to launch a quick poll. Please take a couple minutes, a couple seconds to say that. And as I do that, I am going to ask our panelists to give just 2 to 3 sentence introductions about why they said yes to participating in this panel. Drew.
Sure. Really, our coverage and our reporting is only as good as the folks we can talk to and learn from. So I'm actually here as much to talk as I am to hear from you all and hear what your concerns are. We'd really like to have a lot of coverage that dovetails really what you need help on. So that's why I'm here.
Great, thank you. Aarika?
Yeah, I'm excited to be part of today's conversation. I said yes because my entire career has been in nonprofit development and fundraising, and so it's interesting to kind of see what those national trends are and see how they manifest locally here in the Bay Area.
Great, thank you. Marisa?
Hi, good morning, everyone. So I said yes because I live and breathe fundraising, and I really like to talk about it and share ideas with other fellow nonprofits in the area. And who could say no to Shaké?
Oh, well, thank you. Certainly, some of my donors have used the same phrase too, which helps tremendously. Thank you, everybody who has participated in the poll. I'd love to see a few more of you if you're able to participate. And Lisa, why did you say yes?
So in nonprofit theater, we most of us learn as we go. We don't have MBAs or HR training, and so becoming parts of groups and collaborating with people all over the country is the way that we train and we learn. And so this is sort of just what we do. So when an opportunity arose, I said, yes, please include me in the conversation.
Fantastic. Well, thank you to the 4 of you for saying yes to the conversation. I'm really excited about our conversation and the themes that we'll be discussing today. Just to let you know who's in the room with us. So we have organizations of all different sizes. Can you see the results on your screens? So we have organizations running up to about $10 million, organizations from under $100,000, so a wide variety of sizes, and people, paid staff, board members, volunteer executives, and others in the room as well. So this is a broad community. And I'll mention that while we have planned or scheduled to make sure we cover a lot of ground during today's conversation, please feel free to ask questions in the chat, and we will keep an eye on it. We do have dedicated time at the very end for audience questions, and you can ask questions via chat and I'll convey them, or you can raise your hand. We want this to be as interactive as possible. With that said, so I wanted to start off by asking Drew to set the stage for us and thinking about the pandemic, right? And we can't talk about 2022 without talking about the last 2.5 years and how the 2.5 years and our world's experience of the pandemic has impacted the nonprofit sector in the United States. I know you've done a lot of coverage of this, and there is a lot of information from Giving USA on what we're seeing. I would love for you to just talk about some of the national trends from different perspectives and different surveys and reports that you have collected. And I will share your slides for you. But again, just walk us through, give us the 30,000 foot view of what's happening nationally.
Sure. Shaké is going to share some slides, and just, you know, the starting point, the suggestion was that we talk about the national picture of fundraising, which obviously may not reflect your organization or your part of the country, but it's a starting point. I'm putting up there some numbers from 2021. Giving USA, if you don't know, is a formal report put together by the Lilly School of Philanthropy run by the University of Indiana. And it is an estimate every year. It comes out in June of what the giving in the country was. It is not, they are not doing a tally, an actual tally. They don't have reports from various sectors, various organizations. They do an economic analysis. They look at tax data. They look at demographic data. They look at all sorts of economic indicators and come up with roughly an estimate of the total dollars given. They use those total dollars and they break it down by sector. So each of about 13 sectors, education, health, and such. The top line, and we're going to look at this sort of bit by bit and then broaden out, but the top line number for 2021 is up on the screen there. You can see it in the growth over 2020. I will say we're talking about 21, and that seems like a lifetime ago. And I know the economic underpinnings of giving have changed completely. But this is sort of a starting point. We are, as a panel, going to talk about inflation, the possibility of a recession, all that. This is discussing 2021, which was a pandemic-influenced year, but also had very strong economic indicators behind it. So you'll see the total giving there, $490 billion donated. That was a 4% increase over the total giving in 2020. If you adjusted for inflation, it actually made giving for a relatively flat to 2020. And frankly, some folks would look at that and sort of say as a disappointment that you did have strong economic growth, you had a strong stock market in 21. Why weren't the numbers higher? So Shaké, if you'll flip to the next screen. What I wanted to do was bring in 2020 numbers because that helps us to understand what's going on in 2020. So the dollars were just a bit shy, $488 billion of what you saw in 21. But if you look at that growth over 2019, originally, essentially, Giving USA every year does this estimate, and then they come back and revise it. So in their first report, they said growth in 2020, the first year of the pandemic, was about 4%, which is a normal figure. It's pretty run-of-the-mill when you have growth over the time. Well, they went back this year for their new report, and when they redid that estimate, it was a growth of 8% over 2019. So everyone knew that there was a bit of a jump in 2020. There was two crises going on in the country. You had a pandemic and you had a racial reckoning, both of which were fuel for giving. But what folks didn't really realize until this new estimate came out, that 2020 was actually a really remarkable year. You can see on there, the fourth largest increase of any year in the 21st century. So it makes those numbers, go back if you would, Shaké, to the previous slide, it makes that minus 7% growth look a little different when you recognize we had a really phenomenal year in 2020. And in some senses, we were lucky we didn't give back some of those gains, that we actually stayed at that high level. So that's why we sort of need to look at the 2 years combined. If you'll go forward, yeah. This is a sector by sector breakdown. I'm going to leave it up there for a minute. It's a little hard to read, but let me tell you what's here. The first column is by sector, the growth or decline in giving to each sector from 2019 to 2020. The second column, as you can see, is from 20 to 2021. So you can see some dramatic things. Arts, culture, and humanities in that first year of the pandemic was down. In the second year of the pandemic, tremendous growth. When I talk to folks about that, there's a sense that some of the traditional donors to the arts and culture sort of shifted their funding to emergency sort of things related to the pandemic and also to the racial reckoning, that there was a sense that arts and culture were shut down. They weren't having performances. They also didn't have the connections with their donors and supporters. So that first year, arts and culture really suffered in that more than perhaps any other area. The second year, strong regrowth, people returning to their normal patterns of giving, people recognizing the bind that arts and culture was in. So strong giving on that point. Some other sectors, I'll just jump around. I don't have specific knowledge on each of them, but you'll look at environment and animals, strong growth in both years. That is, folks look at that and see increasing awareness, consciousness, and support for the critical climate crisis. There's also at least one theory that during the first year of the pandemic, lots of folks had to go outside to sort of experience and be together and have activity. So people were going to parks, people were going to different things. So some sense that the contact that people had with the outdoors increased over that time. You look at foundations, we'll talk about foundations a little bit later, but they're always fairly strong. You saw the growth there over 2 years. Health, I will say, is a sector that has had fairly long-term difficulty in raising support, a lot of declines over recent years. That maybe keep in mind that Giving USA is a national survey, often weighted by some of the big national groups at the top. And I know some groups like American Cancer Society and a few others have had some troubles in terms of their giving growth over time. So that sector may be influenced a little bit by that. I'll point to the public society benefit category, which obviously has huge growth both periods. This is a category that is a bit of a catch-all for Giving USA. It includes United Ways. It includes sort of civic-minded organization, even some racial justice groups. But by far the biggest kind of group that's in this sector are donor advised funds. They are the big driving force. So again, you see it, everybody talks about it. Giving to those staffs is huge. It didn't slow down in the pandemic. In fact, it grew during the pandemic and even the next year. So religion, you'll see that first year, obviously a lot of congregations and houses of worship were not meeting in person, some drop there, a little bit of growth in 2021. Again, that's a sector like the health sector that has had some long-term struggles, I think. If you go to the next slide. Shaké, if you'll go to the next one.
I think
You're stuck.
it is on the next one on mine, but
Okay, there we go. Okay. What I did here was combine the 2 years. So you're seeing the growth in those sectors over 2 years rather than seeing them separated out. And again, the overall growth was 7.5% over those 2 years. You see some sectors doing particularly well, that public society benefit sector. You can see what we talked about with the health and religion, but that's a snapshot of the 2 years, that first year of the pandemic and the second year coming after. Let me go from that. Yeah, next slide. That'd be great. These are some of the economic factors from 2021, keep in mind. So we are looking at back in time in a sense to something that doesn't exist now, but these are what Giving USA pointed to as sort of the drivers of that unusual growth in 2021 and 2020. A stock market that grew by 25% a quarter over that period. The inflation rate is 4.7. That's one of the highest we've had, and obviously in 2022 will be higher still. Personal disposable income growing by 6.1%. So those are things that when Giving USA puts together its models and analysis for why giving was up, these are some of the things they point to. And I'll stress, all of these things obviously have changed dramatically since January. You want to jump to the next one? One thing I did want to point out, there is one of the experts over at Blackbaud has been waiting for this for years in the sense of when does online giving reach that 10% threshold and does it stay? Online giving sort of came into being in a sense, particularly pioneered by some of the disaster relief groups in 2000s. And so the share of total given by online groups has been growing a little bit over time. Blackbaud folks sort of figure 10% is a threshold that we're not going to go back under, that this number is just going to keep growing. So that's a sort of tidbit I wanted to share. Keep going if you would, yeah. Some takeaways that we had from our reporting and in general to keep in mind, we had some strong growth, but I want everybody to realize that's not that Americans were showing any more generosity in terms of giving more of their income, giving more of their disposable income than years past. Giving has for easily or 20, 30 years always amounted to about 2% of the gross domestic product. Giving by individuals is always about 1.8%, maybe 2% of disposable income. That didn't change in 2021, 2020 in particular, which was a strong year. We had more dollars because largely Americans had more dollars in their pockets. So it wasn't that people were suddenly becoming more generous. I say the billionaire influence here, but I think we'll talk later about the influence of the wealthy, but it's sometimes shocking to think about that gifts of 450 million or above. So we're talking about Mackenzie Scott, we're talking about Jeff Bezos and some of the others, that equal 5% of all the individual giving. And if you took those dollars out, the share of individual giving as a representation of the total would be dramatically different. So the share of dollars, charitable contributions coming from the super wealthy and the wealthy in general is growing. We're talking a lot about donor retention. We've got some reporting going on that right now. One of the more optimistic signs, the question was, we had a lot of new donors come in 2020. That was in part one of the reasons you saw that growth in 2020. And the question immediately becomes, how successful are groups in retaining those new donors and keeping them coming back for a second year? So the Fundraiser Effectiveness Project, which does rely on data directly coming from nonprofits and from data processors, gift processors, did show a 24% increase in the share of donors that gave 1 year and gave again the second year. So that's an optimistic sign. Arts and culture, there's some question. We had that sort of boomerang effect. You had a low year for arts and culture that first year of the pandemic, an increase the second year. There's some sense that arts and culture was able to expand its donor base. This is anecdotal, this is not from data, but from talking to some folks. Again, y'all will have your own ideas in your area, whether that's true, but some sense that some new donors came into arts and culture. And the other thing I'll say, and this is probably no news to any of y'all, but every group that I talked to in reporting this out said the minute we could start having events, they were a huge success. People just craved community, they craved being out. That seems to continue to be a trend, that events are doing very well in terms of, one, the numbers of people attending, but also the dollars raised. So I think, Shaké, that's sort of the first part we're going to talk to. Is that correct?
Correct. Thank you so much, Drew, for providing that 30,000-foot overview. As I mentioned, we really wanted to have a panel of nonprofit experts who represent different industries, especially in the Bay Area, to get a sense of how are these national trends translating to what's happening in the Bay Area, to the different sectors in the Bay Area. So I'd like to turn to our amazing nonprofit executives now and just ask for your thoughts. How do the national trends mirror or contradict your organization's trends in 2021? So we'll start with last year. Do they match the realities on the ground in our neck of the woods, right? It's nice to talk about national trends, but what does it look like right here in the Bay Area and right here in the Tri-Valley? So I'd like to start with you, Marisa.
Sure, thanks for the question, Shaké. So at MOAC, we definitely saw a slight dip in giving in 2021. It was about 8% compared to the height of the pandemic in 2020. We acquired about 1,900 new supporters in 2021, and that's compared to about 3,300 in 2020. We saw the pandemic, especially the height of the pandemic, as a silver lining for us, and we saw it as an opportunity to connect with more individuals and certainly put our case for support out there and make it really resonate with folks. For Meals on Wheels, we had the advantage, I suppose you could call it that, where folks kind of started to understand what it's like to be isolated, not being able to be with your family because of, the risk of spreading the virus. Seniors, the seniors that our Meals on Wheels programs serve are isolated every day. So that messaging really resonated with people. And so about 4 days prior to the stay-at-home order here in California, we started reaching out to folks, and we started talking about how Meals on Wheels programs were going to continue delivering meals no matter what. And that was so effective for us that we raised a little over $2 million, nearly doubling our revenue compared to the previous year.
That's amazing. also refreshing to see that the community was concerned for people in our community, right? So people wanted to make sure the most vulnerable members of our communities, those who couldn't leave their homes, would get the necessary supplies during a very uncertain time in our lives. So thank you so much for sharing that information. Aarika, I'd love to hear, I know you joined in 2020, so 2021, you've been with your organization during the pandemic, but what were the trends you saw at your organization during 2021?
Yeah, thanks, Shaké. Actually, a very similar story to what Marisa just shared. We actually saw a huge increase in giving in 2021 compared to 2020. And I think part of it did have to do with our storytelling about our programming as well. Our program is a home-based family engagement literacy program. And so suddenly all of these families were with their kids at home who were doing distance learning, and that reality of having to be much more involved in their child's education, I think, just became more relatable for everybody who was a parent during the pandemic. We also provide literacy content through digital technology. So we give them tablets and the digital library subscription, as well as physical books. And so at a time when libraries were shut down, that also, I think, became very relatable for a lot of our donors and also new donors. Our revenue also increased 45% in 2021 compared to 2020. And part of that was a pretty deliberate focus on growing smaller level gifts with individuals and really focusing on some of our stewardship with our major donors. So I would say that there's definitely maybe a little bit of departure with what we saw compared to the national trends. However, as Drew was going through that, he talked about the rise of events and everyone wanting to be hungry for events. And we definitely saw that at Always Dream. We did a virtual event in 2020 and went back to an in-person event in 2021 and increased our event revenue by about 71%. So I think it's true. People are hungry to be in person and craving that event focus, which has, I think, been helpful to reinvigorate some of our donors who typically, maybe prior to the pandemic, had given through events.
Great. Thank you so much, and appreciate you giving us the lens of events. It's been such a hot topic in the nonprofit sector, right? Do we start doing events? How do we manage the ebbs and flows of COVID, especially up until now, until we became in this endemic phase of the pandemic, right? And we moved from one to the other. Thank you so much. Lisa, you represent the arts, an industry that was hard hit in 2020. So how did 2021 look for SPARC?
So we actually have experienced the opposite of the national arts aggregated data in your slide, Drew. But we are in line with the overall growth in the 2020 information. We were actually up by 100% in fiscal year 20 after a successful Till It Be Morrow campaign that was fueled by major donors, and they essentially replaced our lost ticket income that year. Then in 2021, we saw a drop in individual giving, and due to, in part, losing all of our live programming, which is the core of what we do, for 2 years straight. So we landed at 71% of 2019 pre-COVID levels now in 2021. But the government support filled that gap. It also took our fundraising attention. So we did spend more time trying to learn how to bring in the federal dollars and the government money than we did on the individual donors. So it may not be a reflection of the donor's desire, but of our capacity to ask. We were very hard hit. Everything we do what had to be done differently when we were online. We also did notice that we have fewer individual donors, and that the major donors were kind of stepping up to shore up the organization. And we did, in fact, notice the lower level donors that give at point of sale, that throw money in the basket at the end of the performance. And though that may not make up a large percentage of the dollars, it's important to us because when those individuals engage with us, they become a part of the organization. And that is the part of building community. And they become, long-term patrons, long-term theater goers. Their kids go into our education programs. So the size of the gift may not affect the numbers, but the number of people not engaged, that does hurt us. And that's something that we are going to have to spend quite a bit of time on in the next couple of years to get people re-engaged. And the volatility for the arts has been, it's just been huge. We had to figure out how to do what we were doing differently, which stressed out staff. A lot of the workforce in the Bay, nationally, but certainly in the Bay Area, people have left the arts industry. They were forced to because they performed or produced plays, they taught, they worked in the prison system, bringing art and theater into the prisons. All of their programming, they thought they were diversified, they had 3 jobs, and they were all shut down. So a lot of people have left the industry, which is really traumatizing the industry. So we are still experiencing that roller coaster right now, that you can see even in the numbers with the bars on either side of a 1 year that flipping. So
Sure.
I think that for us, we didn't really mention the giving from the government, but that has really helped shore us up during this.
And I know we'll talk in a bit about the government, and thank you for teeing that up. So we wanted to get a sense, again, we want this to be a very interactive conversation. We're just as interested in learning from the audience in terms of what's happening in our community and organizations as much as from our amazing panelists. So I am going to launch another poll as our panelists talk about giving, right? And as Lisa mentioned, government funding did shore up and helped a ton of different organizations, but not every organization. So some of the funding required their organizations have paid staff. Not every organization has a paid staff member. So we're really interested in understanding. And then even if you have paid staff members, as Lisa mentioned, you have limited resources, so directing your staff to seek out those government dollars might mean you're not able to do other things within your organization. So participants, please participate in the poll. I'll share the information after our panelists talk about whether or not they received government funding. So Marisa, did Meals on Wheels of Alameda County receive government funding?
So it's a little, sure, thanks for the question, Shaké. It's a little complicated. So Meals on Wheels of Alameda County is the fundraising umbrella for 6 Meals on Wheels programs here in Alameda County. And to answer your question about government funding, our 5 out of our 6 Meals on Wheels programs did receive CARES Act funding, PPP, and ARPA funding, which is the American Rescue Plan Act funding. Meals on Wheels of Alameda County did not apply for any of those funding sources, but our Meals on Wheels programs greatly benefited from government funding as they saw a huge increase in the number of seniors who enrolled in the Meals on Wheels programs.
Thank you for that. Aarika, how about Always Dream?
Yeah, we did receive 2 PPP rounds of funding, which was pretty modest overall, but definitely helpful. And what we've seen in other government funding, so we do receive some small amount from our school partners that we contract with. And we're actually seeing more of an increase for this current school year than we have in the last 2 years, because now schools have these ESSER dollars that have a ticking time clock on them of when they need to be used, and they're finding it's harder to use them than I think they initially anticipated, because they don't want to use it for ongoing expenses. And so they're looking for one-off programs that they could fund it for a year, or supply purchases and things like that. So we're kind of taking advantage and trying to leverage those ESSER funding dollars that are going out to districts that have that expiration date on them, to at least support our program for the until those dollars run out.
Great. Lisa, you started talking about it, so.
Sorry, I got a little excited. Yes, we have received funding from all levels of government, which was absolutely new to us. The California Arts Council has been very supportive for very many years in Alameda County, but to get federal dollars is something new to us. We needed it and it worked. We received PPP, SFOG, rescue plan, and now we're working on the ERTC, the employee retention tax credit, which was scary at first, and I didn't apply at first because of the incredible accounting that was necessary, but was advised that there are accountants that specialize in it and that it's worthwhile. So we're working on that one right now. It allowed us to not lay anyone off and to do some modest hiring, putting some employees back on salary, giving them a little bit of time away from unemployment, and also the mental health that come from being able to do what you do, even if it's on smaller programs, online programs. So it was very important. It was very, very important. And now the discussion among the nonprofit theater folks nationally in our national listserv is how do we keep this concept of some kind of regular government support on the table post-COVID so that we don't experience this extreme volatility. Libraries enjoy ongoing support and can continue with their programs. Is there a way to embrace arts and culture on a national level in a way that just keeps us from experiencing this sort of traumatizing crisis? But it was great.
Thank you. Thank you. And really important information. So I just wanted to share the results from our second poll. About 38% of people said that monetary donations went up during the pandemic, about 31%. So it's interesting, about a third saw donations go up, about a third saw donations during the pandemic go down, and about a third saw donations stay the same from our audience. And in terms of in-kind donations, so they did see in-kind donations. Some saw about 20% saw in-kind donations go up, and 50% said in-kind donations stayed the same. So 30% said they went down. So it's really fascinating to see how this is playing out in our community. And government funding, again, there are so many nuances to that funding that was available. So 58% of our audience, those who participated in the poll, said they did receive government funding. 38% did not, and 4%, one person wasn't sure if they did or didn't. They could be a volunteer who doesn't have line of sight for that. So, and I apologize. This is a quick share. I'll leave that up. I know we're really excited, and again, packing a lot of information into our time together. We have a ton still to cover. We've gotten through the first two questions, and just for our panelists, very quickly, if you can think of one or two lessons you learned during the past 2.5 years, especially as they relate to fundraising and philanthropy. What are some things your organization has learned? Again, not looking for a super deep dive here, but high level. So I'd love, Lisa, for you to share what are some lessons you've learned around fundraising and philanthropy during the past 2.5 years.
It's funny, I'm thinking differently than than I was coming into the meeting. Well, first of all, generosity is happening, and we're looking at, is it more, is it less? But it is happening. And our philanthropists and government agencies did step in to help. And that's at the forefront of my experience. But it's also, I think the big takeaway is we sometimes do not know. It's not that we forget, it's that we do not know how on the edge the smaller organizations are. That's certainly true in arts and culture. I imagine it's also true in the social service areas with the local groups that don't have, say, a national organization to help them out. That just running your organization as a viable business in the state of California takes a certain amount of time. And since we were already understaffed and stressed, that when there's a crisis, it really impacts the individuals, the workers in that industry, the nonprofit workers, and it does affect the diverse organizations, the underrepresented represented groups to a greater degree because they've already been understaffed and stressed. So I think focus on the smaller organizations, which the SBA has done, is really, really important because there's no fat on the bone.
Thank you. Marisa, how about your organization's lessons learned?
Absolutely. So our lessons learned are to never stop fundraising. The majority of individuals, especially if they're already in your ecosystem, will respond to your requests for support. Personalization is your friend. Having mass emails that are, just going out to everybody on your mailing list is going to frustrate people, especially as they're kind of already feeling like they're giving a lot. There's donor fatigue. Personalization is not just about, inserting a merge field for the first name. It's, about making the message like super personable. It's being written from a person, an actual person. And so segmenting your mailing list, I can't stress this enough. Don't ask someone for $1,000 when they've only given you $10 on an annual basis. That is going to really get your email deleted more than likely, or they're going to click on that spam filter. Clean up your data. Your data, you're only as good as the data that you have. Having someone's name misspelled is going to just upset them, and you're probably going to lose them. So we've, at our organization, we very much, we transitioned to a new database during the pandemic from DonorSnap to Bloomerang. I can't say enough great things about Bloomerang. Look at your data, look at your retention rate, and remember to just never stop fundraising.
Thank you. Such a great reminder. I remember, so I worked in healthcare during the pandemic, and I remember our organization saying, we need to pause. And I had lived through as a nonprofit professional, lived through the 2000 .com boom, and crash, and then 2009, and I was like, we change our messaging. We're not as aggressive as we want to be, but we have to stay in the sphere. So thank you for that reminder. Aarika, I see you shaking your head. Yes. What about yourself? What are some of your lessons learned around fundraising and philanthropy from the pandemic times?
Yeah, well, Marisa, great message. I mean, never stop fundraising. On the same coin, never stop stewarding. I mean, it's all about the stewardship. And I think that was one thing, like you said, Shaké, I came in during the pandemic. So I had an opportunity to take a listening tour with a number of our donors and just kind of get some feedback on what's the organization doing well, where can we improve? And they said, can I learn more about what you're doing? I want more stories, and I don't want every email to have an ask in it, because I feel like you're constantly asking. So to your point about segmentation as well, Marisa, I mean, if someone's already given, make sure that they're not getting another email that has an additional ask, especially if they just gave a month ago. But that's really been something that I've been really trying to infuse within the organization, is how do we do a better job of stewarding our donors at all levels? Because even those monthly donors who are giving $15 a month want to feel like their gift is making a difference. And so how are we sharing that impact back with them? Acknowledging donors quickly and in a timely manner, but also in a personal way. I mean, it's such, it's time consuming, but it's such an easy lift to do. And it's going to, I think, have a huge payback for you in the end. And so for us, just that theme of stewardship has been really, I think, probably the biggest lesson learned for us in the last 2.5 years.
Fantastic. And I see one of our participants added, never stop communicating your impact, right? And I think that's very much in line with stewardship. Stewardship is about impact. Drew mentioned that we would talk a little bit about the realities, right? 2021 and 2022 look very, very different for most Americans. And I'm going to launch a poll, just has one question. Would love to know from the audience how you're feeling about the next 6 to 12 months. But as we do that and you answer that, I wanted to ask Lisa, for you to talk a little bit about high inflation. And high inflation continues to be top of mind for most Americans. Not only is it in the news constantly, right, hitting us over the head, but it is also in every aisle of the grocery store. So Drew's slide had the cost of milk and eggs and the staples and bread increasing dramatically over the last several months. How has inflation impacted your organization? Like, can you give us, like, here are 5 different ways that inflation has impacted you?
So yeah, we've had the inflation and the supply chain issues, which are sort of wrapped up in that, but it's had a huge impact. There is a crisis in the arts industry right now, because arts workers are leaving the industries in droves. We can't find technical directors, stage carpenters, stage managers, set builders, even ACT, which here in the Bay Area is, if not the biggest arts theater organization, it's one of the top 3. They're even out on the listserv asking the small groups, do you have a technical director? We need someone to build our youth set. So while being shut down for 2 years, the arts industry workers had to find other work. And many of them are not coming back. And artistic directors that stuck with their organizations to get them through the crisis are now, as of this month, many of you may have seen Lily Janiak's article, now they're leaving. They're exhausted, they're toast, they got us through. And so there's a big turnover. And when these turnovers happen, it usually takes about 3 years, and it usually has national ripples as people move from organization to organization. So the way that the inflation is happening is, those of us here in the Bay Area know that this is one of the most expensive places to live. There already isn't enough affordable housing. Gas is necessary because we don't have great transit. We don't have great public transit. So the gas prices are up. The housing was already impossible to find. And then people had to move into other jobs. So there is a huge impact we're going to be seeing it for the next 3 years at least. And it will change the face of the arts and culture, certainly the performing arts organizations in the Bay Area. I predict that many will close, some will combine and merge. So I'll just say that. And then the other aspect of it is that the people that are employees that are staying are demanding higher salaries. So while we're seeing maybe some rise in arts and culture giving, the minute those dollars come into our coffers, they're going out in salaries to the people that we do have. And they're not wrong in demanding higher salaries. But again, we were already a workforce on the edge. So we didn't have any reserves, any backup, either emotionally or within our bank accounts, individual or corporate. So that is going to change, have to change the way we do business in order to balance those books. And then, of course, we couldn't get half-inch masonite. We couldn't get quarter-inch masonite. That's what we used to deck our stage. So here we are coming back from COVID with a bang, 3 shows at Darcy Kent Vineyards, new stage, so excited. Funders were, behind it, helped us, raise the money for that stage. And then we couldn't deck it. We ended up with quarter-inch masonite. And those of you that live in the Tri-Valley know it's hot during the day and it's cold at night, and condensation happens in those moments in between. Ruined our deck in a weekend. We were out there every performance with a staple gun. We had to trash it at the end of the season. Normally, we would have been able to make that masonite a half-inch last for 2 years. So then again, higher costs, adding to the landfill. So yeah, we're experiencing it from all ends.
Wow, I can only imagine how stressful it must be to keep going, but also to motivate everybody to keep going with you, right? And ensure that the organization continues on its trajectory. Okay, so audience members, I know more than 4 of you are out there right now because my screen is showing 56 of us in the room. So I want to really know, how are people feeling? We want to understand, what are your thoughts about the next 6 to 12 months? No one else can see what your answer is. So if you're freaking out, it's okay to freak out. You're amongst your people here. Let us know what your thoughts are. I'm going to keep the poll open for a little bit longer, but I also wanted to ask Aarika and Marisa to talk about how you're preparing for a potential recession. I know many of us are afraid to use the R word, but truly, putting our head in the sand is not a great strategy for our organizations and for our sector. So how are you and your organizations preparing for recession? So Aarika, I'll have you talk first, and then we'll go to Marisa.
Yeah, the R word. I brought back memories of 2008, 2009, and kind of just thinking about what the lessons learned were from that period of time and being a fundraiser. And I think honestly, it's probably instituting and continuing a lot of those tactics that worked in that time period, which is going back to, I think, my lesson learned. It's all about stewardship and relationships. I mean, the stronger your relationships are with your donors at varied levels, the more that you're doing to communicate with them about how your program is making an impact and what's happening, and being transparent with them, I think the better, because that's going to build more trust with your donor base, and they're going to feel both hopefully financially, but personally invested in seeing you and your organization succeed. I think another thing that we're thinking about at Always Dream is, and this is also, I think, a lesson I learned from 2008 is, don't get stagnant in just thinking about how you're going to survive in the here and now. But I think donors do really want to see, well, how are you as an organization thinking about the future and what's on the horizon for you? And so maybe that's giving donors some optimism, something to look forward to in what could be perceived as a dark time. And so that's something that we've been working a lot on over the last 8 months, is a new strategic plan for the organization to really show donors, and new and existing, here's where we're headed, and building the story around why this is needed, why our growth is important. And that's actually been getting a lot of our donors really excited to see that we're not just thinking about how we're going to make ends meet for this next year or the year after that, but we're thinking more long-term about our work and the kids and families that we're serving.
Great, thank you. And Marisa, before I jump to you, I want to share our poll results. My apologies, I'm not sure why it went away so quickly the first time around, but I'm glad more people have participated this time. So about 40% of our audience is optimistic. Yay, I love the optimists in the crowd. Thank you for being with us today. About half of the audience is cautious about the future, understandably so. 3% pessimistic and 9% freaking out. All really valid. And I think depending on the moment in the day, all of those feelings I experience. So I'm sure the rest of you have moments as well. So Marisa, I'd love to know, how you're preparing for the recession.
Yeah, absolutely. So according to a survey from Alliance Insurance Company of North America, they found that 66% of Americans are worried about a major recession, that it's right around the corner. So what do we do with that? Well, to make up the potential difference in lost revenue, we're increasing our acquisition campaigns by about 15%, which equates to about 25,000 new supporters. And we hope to be able to capture an additional 1,000 to 1,500 supporters in the next year, and hopefully retain them with our cultivation activities. We're really hoping that we can cultivate our current supporters who are in our ecosystem with some kind of zhuzh up our cultivation activities and stewardship activities as well.
Great. Thank you so much. So we wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about the giving crisis, right? And how the industry is doing long term. Is there a giving crisis? What are the long-term trends? What are the numbers that we're seeing? Drew, one of your articles was the front cover of the Chronicle of Philanthropy about nonprofits and the opportunities we have for reconnecting Americans to the nonprofit sector and participating. So I wanted to turn to you to talk about some of those big trends, the long-term trends, and I'll share your slides with the audience.
Sure, that's great. And Renee, I did see your note about the high level trends and what they apply to. I'm going to go through some high level trends, but even just hearing Marisa and Aarika talk, the high level trends do translate to some things that I'll talk about at the end, but bear with me first. This is the first, it's a look at giving nationally since 1981. You can see it's on a trajectory up almost every year. We started at the black line is adjusted for inflation. You had 50 billion giving in 81, now up to 484. A good news story. Again, nonprofits have more money, Americans giving, it all sounds good. There's some concerns that a lot of folks have with some of the underlying data behind this. And if you'll go to the next slide, Shaké. This is, so again, the Lilly School of Philanthropy is part of a longitudinal study that the University of Michigan does of a few thousand Americans, and it started back in 2000. And they have some questions in this longitudinal survey looking at charitable giving. From that, they have determined over this period the share of American households that are giving to charity. And you can see in 2000, 2002, it reached 68% for the high. 2/3 of Americans, 2 out of every 3 households were giving to charity. Then you see a drop off 2008 to 10. That's the Great Recession hits. And you see a drop off. You see continued decline to 2012 and to 59%. And then a fairly steep drop off to now it's actually under half. So we went from 2/3 of Americans giving or households giving to charity. We're down to under half at this point based on this survey. And you can say that's one survey, it's one data point, but there's a lot of other material that sort of supports this. If you look at tax data and the number of Americans who are itemizing a charitable gift, if you look at volunteering rates, if you look at data like Blackbaud has on very, minute level of giving, a lot of numbers support this, that there is a fall off in giving to charity. If you'll go to the next slide, Shaké. One of the results of this is a shift in the reliance of nonprofits like yourself on individuals. The left-hand pie chart shows the source of giving for all giving in 1981. You'll see that individuals made up 83% of all the dollars that were contributed to charity in 1981. That number is down to 67%. About 4 years ago, it went under the 70% level. It's down now to 67%. One of the things to note about that is what's making up the difference. And if you look at the foundation slice of the pie, foundations were giving 6% of total dollars in 1981. Now it's up to 19%. I will say the bequest number fluctuates. It really is not a factor. It's 1 year it's up, 1 year it's down. There's not a real rhyme or reason. Corporations, they are consistently in that 4 to 5% range. Just so you know, they consistently give about 1.5% of their after-tax profits. So any given year, you can expect the corporate giving to mirror what's going on with their after-tax profits. But the real change here is to note that sort of the bulwark of American philanthropy, which has always been individuals, that's shifting, that's changing. We have a fall off in giving. If you go to the next slide. Reasons for decline, there are a lot of, I'm going to look here at some external reasons. When this first started happening, we were reporting on it in 2015 and 16. We were close enough to the recession that there was a lot of focus on the shrinking middle class, the hollowing out of the middle class. And, you know, the theory at the time was sort of, well, the recession broke people's habit of giving, that they are, you know, at the end of the month or at the end of the year, they had less money than they usually did. So they said, okay, I'm going to take time out from giving this year to this charity or that charity. And the concern was, are they going to pick that habit back up? So that was one theory at the time. It was a demographic, economic force that was leading to reduced charity. It's also declining religiosity. Obviously, faith, religion, not only in terms of dollar figure, you see a big share of giving going to religion, but you also see declining in religious attendance. Some theories thinking that people develop their charitable behavior and thinking about others through houses of worship. So that may be one possibility. Loss of trust in nonprofits institutions. We've talked about this as a panel group. It may be that's more at the national level than local levels, but there is some concern that institutions broadly, and particularly in the younger generation, people are not as attached to institutions as they were a couple decades ago. And then this last category is just the younger generations are not, again, not as attached to institutions, not as interested in doing good in the way that it used to be with giving to a local charity. So those are sort of the external reasons that people point to for decline. I'm going to talk a little bit about some perhaps internal reasons and some things that nonprofits may do to either accentuate it or cause it themselves. And one of the things we talked about earlier, foundation giving, nonprofits themselves may have short-term revenue pressure and feel the need to raise a lot of money in a quick time, and it's more efficient, particularly when there's dollar pressure for return on investment, to focus on major donors. A lot of gifts. In the time I've been at the Chronicle since 2014, the number of nonprofits that have developed, created, expanded major donor programs has been pretty dramatic. Most of y'all probably know 80-20 used to be the rule for campaigns. You're getting 20% of the dollars, or I'm sorry, 80% of the dollars from 20% of your donors. That's now to 95 or 5% most people accept. I report on one Habitat for Humanity out of Tennessee that just decided they weren't even going to have a public phase of their campaign. They funded their entire program on major donor gifts, decided it just wasn't worth the effort, the time that you spent into those small gifts. I think it was Lisa or Aarika, you were talking about stewardship. You know, whether folks are sort of short-circuiting or short-changing their stewardship efforts, particularly at the small donor level, sort of ignoring those grassroots givers in order to focus on the bigger givers. That's a concern. The giving pledge effect, you know, I'll give you an example. There's a fundraiser at Harvard who I've known for a lot of years, very smart guy, very, very concerned that a lot of the bigger nonprofits in particular focus on celebrating the big dollars that come in. The media attention to the Gates giving pledge effect and such sends a signal to smaller donors, you aren't part of this, you know, you're not a philanthropist, you're not part of this. So real concern about, you know, the giving pledge was actually started to inspire giving. There's a lot of concern that this may be in fact depressing giving from other folks. They don't consider it their job in a sense. Shift away from community focus. there are some organizations, and this is anecdotal, but some organizations I've heard that, have backed off of participating in community events that they don't see a direct dollar return for themselves on. There's a community out in Nebraska that does a big lunch. And typically this is just an event where people in the community come together. There are lots of events, almost like a fair atmosphere. And nonprofits have been backing off of that because they don't want to invest time, money into it when they don't see a return on it. Frictionless giving. There is obviously monthly giving, online giving. The notion that you don't communicate with your donors in any way except by a request, an appeal. If there isn't any sort of personalization, as Marisa was talking about, the giving can be frictionless, but then the people don't feel a connection to your organization. So let me skip to the next slide, if you would. Why this matter? Yeah, I'm sorry, go back up one.
So
why this matters long term, if you think about it, if we're losing the small gift donors, and becoming much more reliant on the big givers, there's a problem for the future in terms of you don't have those small donors who are coming up through the pipeline. There's also some concern about Americans doing a lot of charitable giving outside or charitable work, I should say. They're exercising their charitable impulse outside the traditional sector. At the biggest level, at the billionaire level, you're talking about limited liability corporations, which philanthropists are gravitating toward as opposed to foundations. So they set up an LLC in order they can do political giving, they can do social giving. So they are finding that their dollars, they don't want to dedicate them to philanthropy, they want to push them off also into politics. There's also some studies showing that the younger group don't see a difference between political and charitable giving. If they give to a candidate, they see that as charitable giving and they've done their charitable work. So there's a confluence there. The rise in mutual aid, we've reported a lot on mutual aid groups, growth during the pandemic, neighborhoods, people of a type coming together and working and helping each other. It's all to the good, but some funding that Giving Tuesday, some research Giving Tuesday has found is that 1/3 of Americans are now giving or doing charitable good outside the traditional sector. All to the good. If you're a food bank and a neighborhood is taking care of itself, that helps you and your impact, but it does mean that the people in that group may not be as inclined to connect with you, may not be as inclined to give to you. The last thing is sort of a rise in direct giving in a way directly to individuals in need, projects in need, as opposed to a charity to do the work. This is from survey again of individuals. I prefer to give directly to individuals in need, not be a nonprofit organization, platforms or websites. 76% of younger folks, 46% of 50 and up. And I'm going to spin through some slides real quick. I used to do a project for us
Drew,
ranking. Yeah.
Sorry, I'm going to ask you
Yep.
just for a second before we
Yep.
jump into those direct
Yep.
giving and go a little
Yep.
bit deeper. I think this is really important. And again, I think during the pandemic, this was elevated. I can tell you, especially in my neighborhood, I live in Livermore, California. There were a number of pop-up food pantry type of sheltered areas that people in my neighborhood started putting together. So it was direct giving, and those individuals were getting a Venmo or PayPal or cash donations going to them, and they were stocking it, versus somebody in the neighborhood going to a local official food pantry. So it was on the driveway. So that mutual aid type of work was happening in my neighborhood, and 3 different locations in a walking distance within my neighborhood. And then I have personally also seen that a lot of people are using GoFundMe pages or Donor Choose. I mean, so every classroom has multiple Donor Choose projects, at least at my son's school. And so let's take the traditional, what we thought the nonprofit was doing, out of the equation and support people directly is really playing out. That's why I wanted to keep the slide up for a little bit. And I wanted to ask, our panelists and our audience members, so as our panelists are answering this question, What are your thoughts about the giving crisis? You know, what are you seeing within your own organizations in terms of the long-term trends for your organizations? Lisa, you're the founding artistic director. Talk about SPARC, you know, and what are the long-term trends for you?
Oh, sorry, wasn't unmuted. So the long-term, like our long-term revenue plans and strategies?
No, around giving crisis, like what Drew was talking
Oh.
about, you know, what are you seeing in terms of historically, look back to now, trends around involvement, volunteerism, et cetera, participation in your organization?
Well, you know, it's funny, I couldn't decide if there was a giving crisis in our, you know, local area that matched up with the national trends. But I guess I want to sort of reinforce what Aarika and Marisa were saying, that I think some of the ball just comes back into our court, and some of the traditional things that we know about encouraging giving, keeping the relationships real, keeping them positive, bringing people together in order to create community, and then sharing your stories, making, you know, letting people be partners in your organization. That it really comes back to us. Things shift, things change, they always do. We sort of get something, we get something down that this is the way we do fundraising, and people expect it, and then people get bored with it. And I think it's up to us to be responsive to what people's real needs are, and just to win people back. That doesn't mean there isn't a crisis, but there's enough generosity and things happening within the area that I think there's a lot of potential, and that some of the skills that we already have, we just need to, you know, double down and reemploy them, as my fellow panelists have already said.
How about you, Aarika, in terms of your organization? What are you seeing the look back to now trends?
Well, Always Dream has changed a lot in the 26 years that it's been around. I mean, initially it was a foundation that was giving out money to support organizations that served at-risk youth. And then several years ago, there was a strategic decision to really focus on being a direct service provider and going deep into the early literacy space. And so I think with that move, we've just generally seen our long-term giving trends shift quite a bit. You know, I'll also call out that we have a unique celebrity factor with Kristi being our founder. And so that's been interesting too, to see how we leverage her name, but also her connections to support with fundraising. And, you know, I think as earlier in the history of the organization, it was closer to her gold medal win. It was closer to her Dancing with the Stars win. So she was just more publicly visible then. And so I think we've also seen just some peaks and valleys with consistency of donors kind of who are giving because they're fans of Kristi. And so now the work has been, how do we take that admiration of Kristi and help educate these donors and have them shift to being fans of the organization and the work that we're doing, which is not easy. And we're not converting everybody by any means, but I think we're probably very different in that way than most organizations. I mean, this is the first time I've been with an organization that's had a more public figure attached to it, and thinking about how you leverage that and what that means for the long-term trends of our giving as an organization, and then where we take it from here. Because there's also now a couple generations who don't know who Kristi Yamaguchi is, which makes me feel very old. But you know, I was talking with somebody who was a millennial, you know, like a younger millennial, and she was like, well, I'm really more Michelle Kwan era. So, you know, I think, yeah, there's some learnings that we're having there as an organization as well. And then also just then how do you attract people who are truly here for the mission of what we're doing now, and not necessarily because Kristi's name is attached to the organization.
Thank you. Marisa, what about you? Any thoughts on the trends?
Sure. So I believe there, you know, like most of you, there could be, you know, a giving crisis in the next year or 18 months or so. It hasn't happened for our organization just yet, hoping it won't. I think that, when times are, tough, the spirit of, really good people just rises above, self-interest, and they're looking to make an impact and want to be generous. I think that the long-term trends for our organization is to, continue to be flexible with our giving options. We're also going to be focusing on workplace giving and really expanding that activity, improving tech access at our events. Well, we only have one signature event, which we're bringing back next June. Being agile, take a look at what's working, what isn't, what worked in 2021, and see if you can replicate that. And, if something isn't working just because you've been doing it for, decades, maybe just kind of, sunset that activity and move on to something else.
Thank you. So I wanted to also share, I know we wanted to know more about the audience and audience members. So our last poll for the day included, I'm not surprised based off of people who participate in these presentations and with nonprofits, that most of our audience does give to nonprofit organizations. Have you changed your giving patterns? I give more to local organizations now. 2/3 of the group is saying that, which is very interesting to see and hear. Some people are a small, much smaller group, is giving to more to national organizations. People are about 1/4 of the group is giving directly to people I know through GoFundMe or DonorChoose, etc. And then I've staged of course, about 25% are saying that as well. Do you have a regular service role? Most people do have, 91% have a regular service role. Again, I'm not surprised. People who come to our programs are folks who participate with organizations and care deeply about the nonprofit circle. And do you think there is a giving crisis? So more than half, 55% say maybe, jury's out, they need more data. About a third no, and 15% yes. So, we have lots of varying opinions around this. So Drew, I know you have done some reporting around bypassing nonprofits, etc. Just looking at the time and where we are, do you think we can do that in like 3 to 5 minutes?
I wouldn't even do that. I wanted to go back to Marisa and Aarika in the sense of, and again, Renee talking about it at a high level. The conclusion of all this really is that relationship factor, that if donors are feeling disconnected, that nonprofits really have to focus on, for all levels of donors, reestablishing that connection. And I'm just going to spin through a few things that I heard in reporting this out in terms of what groups are doing differently. I think Marisa talked about the basics, and that's, all the experts say, you misspell a name, automatically you're putting some distance between you and the donor. If you can segment and personalize, the story I wrote focused on a young woman who's running a monthly donor program in which she just put her heart and soul and herself into it. The donor program became her, and she put her phone number out for everybody. They called her all the time. They talked to her. It was a very personal connection. She had 200% growth in that donor program, all because of herself putting it out there. The notion of, we talked about storytelling, and when you look at GoFundMe and why it's successful, you think about the stories that are on GoFundMe. They're very personal. They're very direct. So the tendency, and we've talked about fundraising from foundations, that can often be about pumping up your organization. We're better than any other group. We have all this success. Here's our impact. Don't take that language to your average donors, your smaller donors, because they don't want to hear how wonderful you are. They want to hear about the stories of how you're making somebody's life better. So I think that's one of the other things we talked about. Showing that you value donors and even evaluating them on a different level. Connections, particularly for younger donors, mean a lot. Charity Water has started a lifetime impact measure for its donors. And what it does is, if you have a fundraiser, you may give $500, but if you have a fundraiser and you have 20 people who give another $500 or $5,000, that becomes part of your lifetime impact. And that's on the website and people see it. So they are valuing how donors want to contribute through their connections. There's a small group, Children's Home Society of Florida, that its prospect researchers, as they evaluate prospects, are looking at, oh, this person was part of their fraternity or a strong company where they could be an ambassador for us. So they're trying to use and evaluate people in different ways. Collaborating with organizations. Mother Jones has a very small effort that's been very successful for them. When they send a thank you note to their donors, they also note, look, here are 4 other nonprofit news organizations that are doing the same work we are. Take a look at them, see if they might be something you support. It's a way for them to tell their donors, we're part of something bigger. It's not just about us. And their response they've gotten has been tremendous from their donors about how proud they are that the organization would sort of point people to other groups and put themselves as part of a cause. So I think that relationship that Aarika and all of you all have talked about is critical. So even if you reject the notion there's a crisis, really it's sort of doubling down and thinking of new ways to deepen that relationship. That's what the data is showing, is that there's sort of a disconnect between donors and groups. So I'll get off my soapbox, but that's the bottom line.
Yeah, I love that, Drew. Thank you for sharing that. And I think we talk about the wealth gap, et cetera, but at least numbers historically have shown that more people who are in the lower socioeconomic levels tend to give more to their communities and organizations. So when you look at percentage wise, people who are seeing their peers and the impact and feel like they have been helped through something tend to look back and give back and help those behind them come up as well. So while I understand and appreciate that we are looking differently and chasing in some ways the major dollars, I do think it's not necessarily the inequities that exist in our world now socioeconomically, but what organizations are doing not involving people. And Drew, I don't know if remember that I used to work at Harvard University as well. And I think I know the individual that you are speaking of, because he and I used to have lots of conversations about how we're doing a disservice to our own organizations when we're chasing those mega dollars and just the celebrations of those mega dollars. But, a lot of major donors want that publicity. So it's this, as an industry, we've put ourselves or painted ourselves into a corner. And how do we move forward and look through this, whether or not we label it crisis or not? I think it's a crisis if you look at national trends, not necessarily each organization. Questions. So Renee asks, this question came through Twitter. I'm curious if a part of the decline in individual giving is from individuals giving through a community foundation or other foundation. Is part of it a shift rather than a decline? Any thoughts?
I don't think, at least from the data from Lilly, because they are doing a household survey longitudinal study looking at, did you give to charity? So it's not tracking the dollars coming out of an organization. It's from those households. So.
Okay. Thank you for that. And again, what I'm seeing lines up with that as well, Drew, in terms of number of households giving through charity. And any other questions? We'd love to take some live questions too. So if folks have questions, you please feel free to raise your virtual hand and we can have you unmute and ask a question. I know one other question and a long conversation as I was trying to pay attention to what our panelists were saying, but also the chat was around, what's counted as foundation and tax benefits, et cetera, and how the growth in foundations has we're seeing a growth in foundations, but a decline in individuals, but some people might be giving through foundations now. Drew, any thoughts around that?
Yeah, I think that's possible. I think it does speak to the concentration of giving among the wealthy, that you're seeing the vehicles that the wealthy use for giving, both DAS and foundations, growing. So yes, some of that individual drop off could be accounted for by more people giving through foundations, but it does increase the concern of a concentration of giving by the wealthy.
Great. And let's see, I'm looking through other questions. So Shana made the comment that fortunately our larger funders are digging deeper, recognizing that many factors contribute to a decline in individual giving. We are finding small donor support is still a viable opportunity. People, while concerned about the economy and other things, are activated and looking for ways to support others these days. So I am excited that some of our organizations are seeing those patterns and that people in our community, at least in the Bay Area and the Tri-Valley, are digging deeper or understanding that collectively, the $25, $50 gifts are making a big impact. I'm curious for our panelists, what were some things that pivots you made during the pandemic that you're like, oh, that works really well, we'll keep doing it? Or on the other hand, oftentimes we want to talk about the things that went well, and as a country and a culture, we shy away from the mistakes, but were there any things that you were like, this is going to work, and it really didn't? And okay, lesson learned. It doesn't work for our organization. Maybe it works somewhere else, but it doesn't work for our organization. Lisa, would you like to start us off on that?
Yeah, actually, we had 2 COVID pivots. These are things that worked. But one of them, highly unusual for us, is at the beginning of the pandemic, I called a few of our donors and just said, what do you want from us? We're online. Some of the local companies are doing online theater, which isn't theater. We'll do it if you want it. And after about 2 or 3 people said, well, we don't really need plays right now. We just need community. If you can bring us together. And I said, trivia nights? The most successful, it wasn't intended as a fundraiser, but we did a series of regular trivia nights over several months. Well, the entire time we were in shutdown, we had 60, 80, 100 people attending online. And it was an opportunity for volunteers that were tech savvy to come in and help put the program together. It had very little to do with theater, though we did have some Shakespeare questions on each one. And it achieved the goal of creating a sense of community. And it wasn't something we normally would have considered. We stopped doing it when Swirl in the Square, which does a live trivia night, was able to resume their activities. So that was a surprise, and just listening to donors' true needs and not being just stuck in your rut. Success story. And then because we weren't doing our big program, we were able to start a new Science at Play program where we're commissioning specifically from BIPOC writers to create new plays that are truth in science driven. We picked the theme. We did one on COVID, and now we're doing one with Maricela Trevino-Orta on climate change. And they will be BIPOC writers and feature scientists of color and leaders of color in the plays. So we were able to align our social justice initiatives with playmaking, where the focus really was on the development of the script, not on bringing people together in a COVID-ridden space to produce it. And that was also is successful. And so we've committed to doing that program for 5 years. So sorry, it's not a tragedy story to share, but again, listening to the needs of the community and being willing to pivot in a big way. But it has and continues to be successful for us.
That's fantastic. I remember your trivia nights, and so that was fun. It's great to listen to people, right? Asking the question of what do you need, not just to ask the question, but to actually respond to it is huge. And I'm sure that has kept your donors with you because they felt heard. Oftentimes we feel like it doesn't matter, it doesn't matter what I say, the organization still has its strategy. So I think you've shown to them that what is important to them is important to you. Aarika, do you have any examples of things that worked or the pivots you made that like, that was lovely, we tried it, no thank you?
Yeah, I think one thing we did start to pivot to, and part of this was just tied to, we've just had a lot of growth as an organization since I joined, is really looking at how do we help our board members, but also our donor base think about in-kind supports that they can give to us, especially, I've had several conversations probably within the last month and a half about, oh, the market, I don't know if I can give as much as I could before. I'm like, okay, well, let's think creatively. What do I need? And we've had a huge increase in-kind donors. And so just being really honest and transparent with them about here's what we need. I am HR. I don't have a background in HR. Do you know anybody who has an expertise in HR who can donate their time? Awesome. I would love to pick their brain and talk with them. We have a couple lawyers on our board who were able to get us pro bono legal support. So that cut down our legal costs significantly as we were about to do changes to our bylaws. So just little things like that, thinking creatively about in-kind doesn't always just have to be physical things that are directly related to your program and your impact. It could just be things you need as an organization. It could be service, in-kind service support as well. So I think that's one thing we're definitely going to keep continuing on with, is thinking creatively about in-kind. One thing that we've been getting a lot of questions about, but don't have an answer for yet, is volunteering. We've had more people ask, how can we volunteer with your program? The way our model is set up is not really conducive to volunteers because we're working with families in their homes. And then schools have just had so many more restrictions on who's allowed on campus, and keeping track of all of those protocols has been a little bit of a headache. So, I think that's something that, we've had to just say, I'm sorry, we don't have any opportunities like that at this time, and really having to think about, are there volunteer opportunities that could be created and integrated without completely derailing us from our day-to-day work and our mission?
Thank you so much for sharing that. And it is a really interesting time as we try to think outside the box, right? What are ways we can engage people and keep them engaged, volunteer opportunities, and some interesting pivots organizations have made around. It might not include 20 different people volunteering, but an opportunity for one amazing HR person to come and help you think through things, right? And not necessarily feeling like we have to own as executives all of that. Marisa, I'd love to hear from you.
Sure. So we added about 3 more direct mail appeals during the height of the pandemic, which worked out really well for us, acquisition campaigns. We kept our supporters informed with timely e-blasts that really, spoke from the heart, coming from a real person, me. We invited supporters to become monthly supporters, people who were giving on an annual basis. We went from about 35 monthly recurring supporters to about 170 supporters today. So huge increase for us. making it more palatable to give $500 a year and break it up into, smaller chunks. We also focused on folks who focused more on folks who give $100 or less. These folks make up about 70% of our individual giving here at Meals on Wheels of Alameda County. So taking a look at what your data looks like, do it just a very quick, giving analysis of what has, take a look at, what happened prior to the pandemic, what's happening now, and so that you can, plan accordingly to see where your revenue is coming from. We also did some cultivation activities. Thank you calls are free. I promise you, they're free. Thank you calls made by board members. Oh my gosh, we were able to apply for a $10,000 grant just in the nick of time with about a day and a half that I had to create a proposal. And all because one of our board members made a thank you call to a foundation. Amazing, super easy, quick, $10,000 made. Calling folks who, have given for the first time really benefited us to, allowed us to retain those folks. Mailing out postcards, thanking them, for supporting our organization, especially those folks who just started giving during the pandemic. We want to be able to retain those folks. So that's my advice and how we pivoted within our organization.
Thank you. So it's so interesting to me. I think oftentimes as we think about new trends and talk about what's working and what's not working, sometimes as nonprofits, we chase the shiny things and forget to do the tried and true, right? And the tried and true efforts around stewardship. I mean, sending a thank you to somebody. I can't even tell you how many organizations don't do that. Large ones, small ones, etc. And I know we're all shaking our heads. I've given to different causes throughout. We have family members who will ask for donations. And it's fascinating to me, some organizations that I never expected to get a thank you from, I'll get 3 from a board member, a volunteer, and a staff person. And it always delights me because they're different messages. And then organizations that are large organizations that I think should be doing the stewardship really well, in my opinion, as a nonprofit executive for, somebody in the industry for 20 years. And I never get a thank you, but I get lots of solicitations afterwards. 30 days later, I'm being solicited. And so I think we shake our head, but it's my experience, N of 1, but that also translates to our donors, right? So I think design thinking really has helped me in my career think about, put yourself in the shoes of your donor. What is their journey looking like, right? If you're segmenting different ways, what are the messages that they're giving? How do we think about the tried and true? Look at the calendar, right? If you're how many times is somebody getting a solicitation versus information about the impact that they've made and what's working? Drew's example of the monthly giving, the set it and forget it. I don't think that's the right way to treat monthly donors. Monthly donors can and are usually your bread and butter, right? For an organization. Communicate with them, delight them in some fun, exciting way. Send a quick video. There are lots of tools now that you can embed video into an email. 5 seconds of somebody saying thank you. Those are not very expensive things. Our phones, I know my phone, I have a Samsung, and it takes amazing videos and photo, and I can edit it right on the phone and embedded. It doesn't have to be a huge cost, but we can do the stewardship. We can do the communications in ways now that we haven't been able to do it, as long as we are adding that into our plans. And I think that's the missing part, right? Sometimes we get so busy and are wearing so many different hats. We're the HR person, the IT person, the CFO, CEO, etc., that we ran out of time, but it costs us in the long run, and also erodes confidence in our industry as well. So
Marisa, I was just going to add that the woman I was speaking with at the Houston Food Bank would send an anniversary postcard to each of her donors on the 1-year anniversary of their gift with a chocolate cake recipe or a cupcake recipe. Her donors love that. So
I love that. That's a great idea.
That is a great idea. I love that as well. And so we're coming up on our time together. Thank you so much, panelists and audience members, for participating in the polls and the chat and giving us information. As we close, I wanted to ask our panelists to share one closing thought about fundraising in 2022 and beyond with our audience. Like, what is top of mind for you? What are you thinking of around fundraising to 2022 and beyond? So I'll ask Lisa to start us off.
Well, I always see fundraising as integrated with everything else that we do. It's hard for me to think of it as a separate department or activity. I think the catchword for me is collaboration. So we're fundraising for a new building, but collaborating with a dozen diverse groups that can provide an affordable space for performance and culture and education, a theater lab here in Livermore. And that would be a very long-term benefit and project. Fundraising with looking at collaborations with another theater company so we can co-produce a show, reduce the cost, but share it with 2 different communities. And that would possibly include collaborative fundraising, and also collaborating with a university. That these are all conversations that are active this week, to see if we can't collaborate more with students that are coming into the business and with the expertise that is at a university, to see if they can work with us as a team to build sets and staff the program with interns, which ultimately does become part of your development program, because those parents and their families come to the shows and become donors. It's all integrated. So I think my big takeaway, or my big moving forward, is the word collaboration.
Collaboration and integration, right? I think the organizations that do well do see it as integrated. It's not seen as the fundraising team way over there, and some organizations offsite. Like I used to joke that sometimes as a fundraiser, it felt like the leadership and the program people in the organization wanted you to run in like wearing all black, run in with your duffel bags full of money, dump it on their desk, and then run out as quickly as possible. Don't ask them for anything, don't ask questions, don't talk about anything, don't ask for their time. And that doesn't work. There has to be true collaboration and integration with the organization and the program in order for the dollars and the volunteerism and the in-kind donations to flow into the organization. So thank you so much, Elisa. Appreciate those 2 really key words. Aarika, what about yourself?
One of my first jobs out of college was a sales job. It was horrible and I hated it. But my manager at the time said, remember, always be closing. And so I think changing that now to always be cultivating is probably, for me, my outlook on fundraising for 22 and beyond. I probably sound like a broken record around the stewardship piece, but there's so much room for improvement. I always dream on where we can take our cultivation efforts and our stewardship efforts. And so even if I think like, okay, this is better than it was 6 months ago, I know that there's always room for improvement. So just regularly looking at that and not forgetting, like you said, Shaké, like the basics, right? Go back to the fundamentals, because there's a good chance that you're going to stand out, because a lot of people have left that behind.
Great. I love that. Always be stewarding. I'm going to keep that in mind. Marisa, what about you?
Definitely. So the philosophy that I really try to embody at Meals on Wheels of Alameda County is to meet people where they are. So if they support you with a check, send them a direct mail appeal. If they support you with online giving, make it easy for them to give. Boost up that digital wallet, make it happen. Apple Pay, Google Pay, Amazon Pay, any sort of pay, make it super easy. Everyone is on their smartphone. Most people don't even use a laptop anymore, especially when they're out and about. Just make it super, like, you know, eliminate that friction to giving. Also, just keep it moving and never stop fundraising. Share inspiring stories, make it clear, make your direct asks super clear, and have a call to action. Your e-blasts, your direct mail appeals, ask them, invite them to participate, invite them to be a part of something. I can't stand when I, receive an e-blast from an organization that has all this great information, but it doesn't ask me the question of, will I join the effort? I'm just going to click delete because you don't really want my money. You just want to tell me about your story. That's great, but ask people to be a part of your organization and your mission.
And I think, again, there are different ways to be part of an organizations and missions, right? There's the in-kind donations, as we talked about, and financial contributions, but also advocacy. For some of us, depending on the type of organization, we may need those additional voices in our community helping pass a law or not pass a law, right? Or create funding revenues for different nonprofit causes, adding that to the budget line items, etc. So there are ways your community and your audience can be part of the story and can be your partner of walking alongside you and celebrating your successes. So thank you for that important reminder of a call to action and meeting people where they are rather than trying to funnel everybody into this one little box. Last but not least, Drew, I would love, based off of this global view that you're bringing to us, what are some of your closing thoughts for our audience?
I think the whole idea of building community, there was one fundraiser I spoke with who been in the business a long time, and a little bit chagrined that when she started, it was you built community first and then you started asking about donations, and she felt like things had been reversed a bit. And so I think anything that you do to build community out of your donors, your supporters, people who reach out to you, better groups doing book clubs, groups doing talks where the nonprofit is the expert, or they bring in folks, showing your value add in a sense. So
great. Thank you so much. Again, on behalf of everybody who participated in the program today, on behalf of the Tri-Valley area, on behalf of our communities that benefit from the incredible work that you do, and Drew, on behalf of all of the nonprofits who read your articles and you see you and the Chronicle of Philanthropy as a source for us to keep a pulse, our fingers on the pulse of what's happening in the sector. I just wanted to thank all of you for saying yes to be part of this conversation. And I will turn it over, although is Kathy still here or did she?
I'm here.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Turn it over to Kathy.
Great. Well, thank you all so very much. I always like a meeting that ends at least a couple minutes early. So I'm going to just go ahead and thank each of you for showing up and for the time and care that you put into this presentation. It was really helpful. And we have people not just in the Tri-Valley, but several across the country that have joined us this morning. So thank you everyone who attended, and thank you again to Shaké and our panel. So have a great week.